Does doing the right thing come at the cost of business performance? Can ethics and profit coexist? Welcome to the Human Conversation podcast. Join host Kaumadi Gowda for candid conversations with industry luminaries as we navigate the maze of decision-making in today's global workplace. Each episode offers a window into the minds of leaders achieving remarkable outcomes while balancing diverse priorities and stakeholders. Tune in for thought-provoking insights and actionable strategies on leading with ethics every day. Because in the pursuit of excellence, integrity matters.
For over 25 years, through his agency, FreshBritain, Bob Sheard has quietly shaped more than 200 of the world's brands. Nike, Levi's, Dr. Martens, Arc'teryx, New Balance. He's the kind of strategist who'll trek across a desert or test kit in the freezing cold just to understand what a brand really is. And it works. He took Dr. Martens from a struggling 90 million business to a 3.5 billion flotation in 11 years. Bob Sheard is a leading brand strategist, the author of The Brand New Future, How Brands Can Save the World, shortlisted for the Business Book Awards, and frankly, one of the sharpest minds I know on why brands matter and what they owe the world. Please join me in welcoming the brilliant Bob Sheard. Very warm welcome to you, Bob. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bob, I've heard so much about you. I've been so looking forward to this conversation. You've had such an interesting career. A brand strategist, C-suite advisor, founder, sustainability advocate, author, educator, mentor, just to name a few. Is there a red thread that connects all of this for you? What was the driving force behind all that you do?
I don't know. I think some people would sort of say that the red thread is opportunism, just seeing where I think I can add value and going there. Others would say it's a heavy dose of ADHD, continuously moving on to the next thing. I'd say sort of it's really the product of a restless mind, ambition. So it's part restless mind. When I wake up in the morning, it's almost like someone's been filling my mind up during the night, and then I have to get that stuff out. And then also just a sort of a very conscious ambition to see where my mind will take me and to see where it can go in terms of fulfilling potentials. It's kind of, I did a piece of work for a guy called Sam Petroda, who was the godfather of Digital India, and he was writing a book on how to redesign the world. And so I did a little bit of campaigning communication strategy for the INC and him, and he liked the way I was thinking, and he said, look, I'm writing a book on how we redesign the world, and I just would like to use you as a kind of conversation partner and things. And during the course of that process, he said, look, people don't think this big, and because their everyday lives consume them, and it's very hard to take yourself out of the goldfish bowl of life and look back onto the goldfish bowl and say, right, how do we redesign this? And he said, there's very few people who actually go up there. And so it's a really interesting compliment. But for someone who used to work on a market stall in Bradford, it's an exciting prospect to see where that kind of thinking and that the way my brain works and see where that will take me. And it has taken me into education, into boardrooms, into publishers, and that's the red thread really. That's not really a red thread, that's lots of little red threads, but yeah.
Yes, but it's interwoven into a tapestry that makes for a fascinating story. At what point in your life had you figured out that this is an incredible adventure and I want to follow this through, so I'm going to pursue the curiosity of my mind and see where it takes me? Because that is a little unusual. The shared cultural heritage of UK and India is that things are fairly traditional career paths have been the thing. And so one is encouraged to see it through, sit tight, a rolling stone gathers no moss. These are all things we as kids have learned because we have inherited that heritage and that way of thinking, that philosophy from the UK in a way. So at some point, you must have made a conscious decision that, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to pursue the curiosity of my mind. When did that happen?
It was when I was really young. I went to a comprehensive school in Halifax, West Yorkshire. which has since been closed down. And I was studying for my A-levels. I've got loads of, I don't know if you remember, but it used to be O-levels and then CSEs before they did GCSEs. Well, I've got loads of CSEs. So I used to joke with my kids that when we go to they're probably the parent with the most CSEs. And so I managed to scrape in, they let me go into the sixth form to do A-levels, but they wouldn't let me apply for any polytechnics or universities because they didn't think that was possible. Not just me, everyone else. It was like, that's for other people. You can go to a college, but you can't do anything else. I did my A-levels and I did 4, and I got I did in economics, art, general studies, and history, and I got 3 E's, so just about scraped a pass, and then 1 A. And that A, along with another guy at the school, was the first A our school had ever got at A-level. And so I remember walking in to get the marks, and the history teacher was running down the drive, went, Sheardy, you got to come," and took me into the head's office. And they were beaming that the school had managed to get this A. And so at that point, I realized, or maybe there's a brain inside there somehow that can, once I know where the goalposts are, I can figure out a way. So then I had to, an A and 3 E's wasn't going to get me into anywhere I wanted to go. So I had to retake the 3 E's again. So I then worked on a building site for a year as a labourer, which I loved, and then retook my A-levels. So I got sufficient then grades to get to the London College of Fashion. And it was a very interesting conversation to go onto the building site to tell the guys I'd got entry into the London College of Fashion, because I kept that secret. But they were very supportive. So it was at that point you kind of realize, okay, I've got the ability to find a way. And so then I realized I didn't quite know, but it's a continuous journey, isn't it? It's just trying to figure out that sometimes you're thinking thoughts other people don't have, and they add value.
It's terrific. I have 2 boys in high school right now. And as a parent and as also a product of fairly traditional, rigorous, rigid schooling and education system in Asia, I've always wondered, you're a branding expert, and I always wonder what that does to a child's mind to be categorized or branded, if you'll permit, that they are a certain way, that they should follow a certain path. And for that child to break those shackles and then decide to be creative and pursue and make up a path as they go along.
Well, I'll tell you a wonderful, it just popped into my head, a beautiful story of Indian heritage. The guy that became my best man. So when I went to London, I got a job behind the bar in a London University Union bar, ULU it's called. And the first night I worked there, I met the guy that became my best man, the guy that became godfather to my son, and the guy that became godfather to my daughter. And the other guy working behind the bar that night was Ricky Gervais, who I didn't get on very well with. We used to rip each other a bit too much. And then the guy who became my best man, he's now the youngest invested professor in North America. So he got his investiture. So he's an endowed professor at Northwestern in neuroscience, right? So his brain is incredible. And he grew up at the end of a terrace house in Bury, Lancashire, with his 2 other brothers, going to school in Bury, not having a word of English, at age 5, but living in this very traditional Indian household. His youngest brother, who we know of as Puddle because he used to wet his pants a lot, is now the head of cardiology for the whole of North of England. And so you got him, who's the youngest invested professor in North America. You got the head of cardiology for the whole of the North of England. And then you've got the eldest brother, who used to run Columbia Music in New York with Beyonce on speed dial, and now helps run Universal in LA. So you got these 3 brothers who went to this local primary school, couldn't speak a word of English, didn't have a great time in the industrial north, but managed to find a way to create the most amazing careers. And what really struck me was I went to Chicago and the 3 brothers were there and all their kids were there, but for the first time. So you had the cousins ranging from age 2 to 22, one at NYU, another one in Manchester, other one surfing in LA. And I said, the really interesting and powerful thing is the harvest of your mother's and father's sacrifice in being first generation is in this room today. And Puddle said, the miracle of it all, Bob, is that my dad came over in the 50s to study engineering at Dundee, and then he went back to India when he got qualified, and he put an advert in the paper for a wife and was married 5 days later. So there's some uncle somewhere who didn't really care that much about his niece, picked her out of a field and said, you go into this paradise called Bury with this prince who's got an engineering degree, and that's your life. And so really the harvest of her life was there. And I just think that's such a powerful argument for immigration, that actually there is a dynamic dynamo type power in a second generation immigrant to not want their parents' life to be a sacrifice in vain, and therefore they go a bit further, a bit faster to make their lives worthy of the sacrifice of their parents. And so I just don't think anyone makes the economic case for that enough. Like Angela Merkel letting in 1 million refugees. 20 years' time, that'll be 2 to 4 million young Germans of different ethnicities turbocharged to not make their parents' sacrifice in vain, and it will drive that economy. So I just think it's an amazing story, and the Indian diaspora is huge now, and the intellect that brings to some of the world's biggest companies, leading Google and whatnot is incredible.
This is what is absolutely fascinating about your vision for the world. You're a futurist, and you talk about how countries have brands, and those brands can change a people, a cultural ethos of the future itself, of the entire planet. When I think about this vision, it comes across to me as very humanist, very universal, kind and compassionate one. In that context, the theme of this podcast being ethics and integrity, what do these terms mean to you, Bob?
The important part of the question, I think, is that those things don't sometimes match. So I think with ethics, that's kind of our moral compass. That's guiding principles and protocols of our life. And integrity is how we deploy our behavior to meet that compass. So that's our moral codes, if you like. So moral compass, ethics, integrity is moral code. Ethics for me is all about saying what you're going to do and do what you're going to say. So there's a level of authenticity and intent around it. Integrity is being transparent, open, and honest when you don't match your ethics. So I think it's all about authenticity. It's all about being transparent and open. But I think true integrity is like acknowledging, actually, I've not necessarily, we're all human at the end of the day. We all have frailties, vulnerabilities, fragilities, and sometimes you don't match your ethical code. And I suppose being honest and authentic about when you've not met your own standards is where integrity lives.
It's a fantastic principle for organizations and leaders, because indeed many times it is not possible to always have a particular value leading the decision. Stakeholder centricity being what it is, and the world being very complex and layered and volatile, perhaps an organizational leader may need to make a decision one way, and when it doesn't feel like it's aligned with ethics, stated ethics, then what you're saying is integrity would help you understand that transparency about that decision, that call between the push and pull between two values or two types of stakeholders. Integrity would guide you in being transparent about it. And that's the way to manage that kind of complexity.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest problems in politics right now, is that you'll see a political leader and you can see that they're governed by a kind of moral compass. And you can see that many politicians get into politics just simply because they want to serve and they want to do the best by their nation. But the way we've designed politics means that in terms of leadership, they're always seeking perfection. And so it's very, 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 very difficult for them to make a mistake and admit to the mistake, or be inconsistent, but then admit to the inconsistency, because they have to present some kind of political perfection. And what they forget is that we don't love perfection. We respect it, but we don't really love it. And actually seeing someone admit that they're wrong, and seeing someone say, maybe I was inconsistent there, and seeing that is why we might, more likely to fall in love with that type of leadership than just the perfection that is very, very rarely achieved. And we can't meet as either the electorate or followers of that leader. We can't sometimes meet those standards ourselves, so it disconnects. And then when you see them painfully trying to create an artificial perfection by not answering direct questions, and they then just come across as being sort of deceitful and sometimes deluded and sometimes deceitful, when actually, if they just were honest and had integrity about the gap that exists between their moral code and their moral compass, then we're more likely to believe them and more likely to follow them.
Spot on. And I notice also if we look at it from the other side of the lens, as a collective humanity, our own capacity to hold space for the contrary nature of humans, the fact that more than one truth is possible at the same time, that people can change and evolve. The opinion I've held 20 years back, and maybe I've tweeted about it, could change. Looks like collectively we've lost the capacity to hold that because we are so unforgiving of our leaders. If they do not project that facade of perfection, we do not feel safe voting for them or following that. And so it's a self-perpetuating cycle where the leaders feel pressure to portray perfection. And we as well are so used to that false portrayal that we are not able to hold space for flawed, fractured humanity. If our leaders admit to flaws, then we get uncomfortable with it. It's very interesting that it's playing out in this way, the rigidity and the cancel culture.
Yeah. I mean, a little bit of just generosity and forgiveness goes a long way.
Bob, you've had such a fascinating career. One of the things that holds my attention, I'd love to hear more about your adventures advising leaders doing spectacular things and creating whole new things that didn't exist before, that changed the course of a country, of a brand, of the story of a particular product. In all of these experiences, was there a time when you personally felt challenged by an ethical dilemma? I want us all to learn how that experience would have shaped your thinking going forward. What was the lesson you learned so that we can learn along with you?
Yeah, I had one very recently happen to me, which this past year, where, and I won't name the parties, but quite a famous company and certainly a very famous leader within that company asked me to do the rebrand one of his funds out of Singapore that was going to become part of a sovereign wealth fund in the Middle East. So I agreed a fee of £120,000 to do the fund in January. And he said, look, you can take your time. I said, okay, what does that mean? He said, I need it by the end of February. So we started work. I sent the scope and we agreed verbally that the fee. We started the scope. He was the principal partner in the fund. Then his other principal partner in the fund at the end of February contacted me to say, we can't afford the scope at £120,000. I said, well, I've started the work now. He said, okay, I'll redesign the scope and perhaps then we can make an agreement. I'll get back to you on Monday. The call was on a Saturday. He never got back to me. And then another person within the fund said, right, we now need the film, we need the teaser deck, we need the LP deck, we need it all by mid-March. Can you get it all ready? So I literally turned my agency inside out to get everything ready because this guy was going to be presented all this stuff on his iPad as the private jet was waiting on the runway for him to look at it all and decide whether to write the check for the fund or not. We did everything. It then got to July and I still hadn't been paid. And I started to say, look, guys, it's about time we got paid. And then in August, the second principal partner called me and said, we can't afford to pay you. We're only going to pay you 50,000. I said, that's not what we agreed. He said, well, you agreed this with the other guy. You didn't agree it with me. And the other person, they were just asking you for the stuff. I said, yeah, but you're one entity, right? You've got the scope. You're one entity. You've engaged with me. I've done the work. And now you're saying 50,000. And he just said, look, we'll close it out at 50,000 if you agree. Now, at the same time, when this was when we had the tariff crisis, so I had really good long-standing clients whose revenues had just dried up and the 4 different clients from around the world whose revenues had just dried up, and they were then putting me on a payment plan. So all of a sudden, I've got not much headroom. And so I said, okay, I'll take the 50, but I'm not happy with this and I'm not going to work for you again, but I'm going to take the 50. He said, all right, we'll pay you 25 now, 25 in November. And then I said, okay, just pay me something. I need to, deal with the salaries this month. And then he sent me an email back saying dollars. We'd agreed this in pounds, not dollars. So then it took it down to £36,000 as opposed to £120,000. And I still hadn't been paid in November, anything. And so it got to November and I wrote to them and said, look, I'm going to send some kind of legal foreclosure on your Singapore office and in your London office because I need to get paid. I need to pay my staff who worked to make you all look good. And they just sent me a note back and said, let's just let the law take its course. So I'm like, okay, I can't really deal with this. So for the ethical dilemma there is, what do I do? Do I go public on this? What, because I'm just a little guy in a room asking for my fees, which were agreed, which are basically a rounding error, on a sovereign wealth fund and on a private equity fund. It's just nuts. And I was faced with having to cut costs. And we're having to say, okay, we've got to now, look at our headroom and how do we cut costs? Well, in a business like mine, you've got your officers and you've got your people. And I went to a party that night, and it was a 54th birthday party, and I met a guy there that used to work for me, and he's one of the coolest cats in London, runs brands and everything, and he's a bit of a name. And he came up to me, and it was early in the night, and he just said, you know what, when the 3 years I worked for you were the best 3 years of my career, and your team are amazing. You've got the best team I've ever worked with. And it was a really poignant moment because I was like, okay, I'm having to decide to make these cuts. And the easy thing to do is first, last in, first out kind of thing. And I just thought, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do everything I can do, whether it's bringing in my own personal money to keep the team together and do what we have to do to keep our team together, to keep our talent together. Because at the end of the day, without them, we've got nothing. We've got a history, we've got heritage, but it's without the team, without the people, we don't have anything. And I'm not going to let the bad decisions, I'm being generous there, the bad decisions of my clients force me to make bad decisions with regard to my people. And so, yeah, and I've told the story a few times to people, and they're just kind of incandescent with the way you can be bullied just because you're the small guy in the room versus the other guys in the room. And I'm not sure, if I'm honest, they're fully aware of the impact of their procrastinations, decisions, not getting back on emails, and their duplicity and the impact that can have on good people down the line. And so, yeah, that was a pretty sad ethical dilemma to have to deal with this year, but we've got through it now. And most importantly, the team are all still together, and we've got new clients, and we're, we're on the return journey.
I think the most powerful takeaway for me, as also a person with a consultancy I run, is the decision to prioritize your team and take care of them, even if temporarily that means intense hardship, both for the business and for you. I salute that, because I think that's where you then create a lifelong loyalty towards you and what you stand for and what your company stands for. That's the stuff that leadership legacies are made of. The second thing I think about is, as a business leader, has this informed your radar for bad clients? Are you now able to discern faster red flags and say, these are the kinds of people I won't work with, for example? That'd be a useful tip for me too.
Yeah, I think my problem is I'm a people pleaser, so I kind of just, I don't necessarily see what I should see straight away. One of the things that has been really telling is that another company in New York that I dealt with, a footwear company in New York, who manufactured all their products in China. I did a big piece of work for them, and then the tariffs came in, which is crazy because they're a lovely company, been around for 100 years in New York. Then tariffs came in, they couldn't bring in their product from China, so they had no revenue. All of a sudden there was zero revenue. Bob, we just literally, we want to pay you, but we haven't got the money to pay you. And they've been paying me what they can afford to pay me when they can afford to pay me. So like 1 week it might be $1,000. It's nothing, but it's just the process of having a conversation and dialogue and the intent to pay means everything. And the fact we talk, once a month about it, and there's been no angst, there's been no anger. It's just them having to deal with it the way they have to deal with it, and we have to deal with it the way we have to deal with it. But we've had continuing conversations. The worst thing that can happen is which happened with the fund, is they just stop emailing. They stop being in touch, and you're left in the vacuum of knowledge and the vacuum of conversation, and you just feel not loved. You feel abused and not loved. Whereas with the guys in New York, I still felt valued by them, even though they couldn't pay me the value of my work in the way I wanted to, but I will get the money. And if it takes another 3 years, we'll get it eventually, but we'll still have maintained really strong, authentic, and mutually respectful relationships.
Communication, honest, respectful communication goes a long way in maintaining relationships, even through tough spots, is what I'm hearing. That's powerful. I'm a conflict avoidant, and so when things feel difficult, my tendency is to become quieter. But this is so powerful. Communication is key to help people understand where you're at and help them continue to keep pace with you, wherever that might be, whatever the pace might be. It's beautiful. Bob, as the world's foremost experts on brand positioning and a passionate advocate for regenerative design, what are your observations on the real-world ethical dilemmas most relevant today? And for professionals out there in whatever sector that are grappling with such situations, what would you advise them?
Well, there is a continual and sometimes very tiring debate now about sustainability and how we create sustainable life on Earth so we prevent things like climate change. And my observation of the debate is entirely one-sided because it deals with the supply and production of things, and it tries to turn that supply and that production into sustainable methodologies or regenerative methodologies. And for me, whilst that's important, it's the other side of the debate where we will get the solution. And the other side of the debate is not in the supply, it's in the demand. It's not in the production, it's in the consumption. And we've got a huge opportunity globally. 1 in 10 people, I think, on Earth right now are Indian and under 20. Generation Z will become the biggest global economic power by 2040. And that, I think, globally, they'll be the first generation that will be more defined by what they know and what they do than what they own and what they have. So if we can lean into that there will be a whole consumer group more defined by their knowledge and their experiences than by what they own and what they have, then that can help change demand. And if we can lean into that and redesign demand in that way, then global demand will be much less for things and much more for knowledge, intelligence, and experiences. And that will therefore, we can just then allow the profit motive to run its course, and therefore production will change. So there's a way in which we can create sustainable and mindful economics in the future. And so when I think that's what I'm thinking about all the time. And so one of the sectors that's really important to solve that is the one I'm from, which is fashion. So I grew up in fashion. I'm a product designer. Fashion saved my life. I used to be bullied as a kid, and then I wore some cool sneakers, and then I went to school in my cool sneakers, and they kind of armor plated me. I got much more attention for being cool than I did for being little. And so I want to carry on. I want fashion to carry on, but I want to be able to be an exponent of fashion with a clear conscience. But if you look at it now, the business model of fashion is based on planned obsolescence. The world can't take planned obsolescence anymore. The product model is based on perfection. The brand model is based on lifestyle, and the value model is based entirely on products. And so whenever I go to events around the business of fashion and things like that, I love them, and I love meeting the people there. They're all lovely people, and they're very beautifully produced events, but I feel like I'm at a steamship convention on the dawn of the space age. It's basically myopically, willfully not looking to the future. And so when I talk to fashion brands, I'm talking to them about, we have to change your business model from being a business model about planned obsolescence, where you're designing short-term trends and bringing out the new all the time, where we have to start to change the design codes in your business model to have long functional life expectancy and long aesthetic life expectancy so we can get more sustainable demand. We have to change the product model to be less about perfection and more about imperfection. So when I designed Levi's globally, I was there saying, look, we've got to design elegant decay into your products. So the more I wear your products, the more beautiful they become. And so you might wear other fashion brands, but you actually live in Levi's. And that's how we got to live in Levi's. That's what took them to their flotations. Good business was good business at Levi's by changing the product model from perfection to imperfection. In terms of the brand model, as Generation Z take hold, they're going to want to buy products and understand the impact of their consumption choices. So as I walk down Regent Street, yesterday, I'm just on either side of the road, there's windows full of lifestyle photography, and it's it doesn't work. It's I put on the Calvin Kleins, I don't get the six pack, I don't end up with Kate Moss. It's all fake lifestyle. It's storytelling that is mythical. And where it's going to move towards is going to move from lifestyle to purposeful life. We're going to move from storytelling to story doing. And then that's going to change the entire advertising industry. And then we've got to look at the value model, which is if we do believe in this idea that Gen Z are going to be more defined by what they know and what they do, then that means we can look into a brand and see value that they can't see right now, because their value model is almost entirely based around their products rather than their audience. So, for example, in fashion, I went to hear a talk by Jacquemus, the hottest designer right now. Fell in love with a guy, got a man crush, loved his stories about growing up in Provence, walking through the lavender fields. And I want to access his brand and be part of it, but I can't because it has to manifest in me buying a pink handbag. And that's not going to happen anytime soon. And so what we've done with brands, we did this with a brand called Simond, which is an ice axe company in Chamonix, doing about 100 million. We rolled another brand into it called Foreclaz, entirely regeneratively manufactured and sourced. So that's takes it to about 1.1 million. And then we made a virtue of scale by selling it through 2,500 Decathlon stores, which should take it to about 3.5 billion. But they said to me, Bob, how do we grow now and make 20% less products? And that's like, okay, that's a tough one, but you're not allowed to put the prices up. So I went back to my friend, the brother from Bury, and he said to him, what happened when you were running Destiny's Child and Beyonce in New York and Napstar came out and started streaming your thing? Because your economic model was sell CDs. And then iTunes came out and scaled it. What happened? He said, well, we had to pivot into the tours. Our byproduct used to be the tours. I'd call Beyonce up and say, write an album. I'd call her manager up at Destiny's Child and say, go on tour to promote the album. And that was the byproduct that sold the CDs. But the CDs disappeared with streaming. So I had to pivot into the tours. And all Beyonce and Destiny's Child is they're a brand. So they pivoted from things to experiences. So I went back to Simon and said, okay, you're a brand about alpinism. You've been around for 160 years. Here's how you grow without making things. You use your audience, which is your gold, and you start to create pathways of growth through getting fit for alpinism, physio for alpinism, nutrients for alpinism, travel for alpinism, insurance for alpinism, second life for alpinism, rentals for alpinism, qualifications for alpinism, training for alpinism, expeditions for alpinism. All those are pathways to growth that use the gold, which is your audience, your scalable authority, which is alpinism, and you can then grow and not make more things. So you create a kind of a marketplace. And that's how I think using that kind of model is how we can start to transform industries like fashion, because it used to be that fashion was ahead of everybody else and creating the change that everyone else followed in culture. They're way behind everybody else now. I was at the Business of Fashion event and there were a couple of people there that were having a very solid dig at Elon Musk getting his $1 trillion payoff and I let them all talk around the table and they're all vilifying him. And they said, what do you think? I said, do you know what? I'm not an apologist for Musk, but the principle of somebody who can turn an entire industry from its reliance on fossil fuels and flip it onto renewables should get paid whatever that value is that creates, irrespective of whether it's Musk or not. And by the way, whilst you're decrying him, automotive has done far more to get ahead of history than fashion has. So clean out your own closet first. And so that's where I'm at with those kinds of conversations.
That is powerful. You mentioned early on before we began our conversation about how a lot of what you're doing is connecting the dots and allowing for serendipity. And what I'm seeing here too is as you're thinking about the future and advising brands on how they can be more mindful about what they're doing and designing for the future generation, more about who they are and what they do versus what they own. You are connecting these dots, bringing in case studies from diverse sectors, using them as templates for how would you cope with change and uncertainty and design for the future resilient organizations and brands, while really prioritizing sustainability and regenerative design.
Well, the priority is actually profitability. Nothing happens unless it makes a profit. Everybody has to be able to go on their nice holidays and send their kids to great schools and have a nice, secure house to live in. So we have to figure out how we generate profitable growth, but above the economic threshold for purposeful economic life, but below the ecological threshold for unsustainable life. So we have to find out where growth lives there and how do we design it. And none of it will happen without the profit motive. There's a really interesting analysis is McKinsey last year reported that CEOs have let sustainability drop off their top 5 priorities. And the reason being is that they're only around for 3 years generally. They have their remuneration is based on their revenue and profit targets. But if you look at another metric, which would be great for them to get their head around, that shareholder value, if they want to increase the value for their shareholders, which is one of their priorities, then if you look at the top 50 most valuable companies on earth, in the top 6, 3 of the top 6 have a brand proposition that's about redesigning the world or reimagining the world or challenging the world. And they're getting multiples from plus 20 to plus 40, whereas the more conventional brand roles aren't. So there's a way in which we need to re-educate CEOs about how to create value, but we have to design, it's why I did the work at Simon, we have to design pathways to sustainability and regeneration that are profit generative. But they have to be mindful. We have to find new ways of designing companies, new ways of designing brands, new ways of designing products, so they represent a new kind of standard, so that good business becomes good business, but it still generates the profits that we need it to be able to generate. Because ultimately, the profit motive is the most powerful organizing force on earth, and it has been for the last 300 years, and we're not going to turn that around anytime soon. So it's about bringing those things into balance. It's about bringing human capital, man-made capital, and natural capital into balance. Going back to Keynesian economics, if we can get those things in balance, then we can move forward. And we've got lots of interesting projects to do that. One of them we're working on right now is to design that standard, working with Central St. Martens in London to start to use their PhD faculties to start to explore how we design the future standard for corporate design, brand design, and product design. And then once we've got that theoretically, how do we then actualize that? And where is the best place to actualize that? And if you have me back at some point in the future, I'll be able to hopefully announce a really exciting project, which is global and sovereign in scale, of how we can do that in the latter part of the 21st.
You drawing a powerful distinction between, and I think it is the real truth of the corporate world right now, is indeed a lot of good initiatives sort of focused on people, their well-being, planet and its well-being, have been certainly set aside because of a sense of urgency around survival. A lot of organizations have revamped, defunded initiatives focused on these things to focus on short-term profit and growth to showcase that they're surviving. What you're saying is both are possible at the same time. And if one looked at the priority of creating shareholder value, that remains central in most organizations, one of the top priorities at least. And if one looked at that, you can see that there are many organizations that are providing that while still continuing to engage in sustainability and employee well-being. Would you have 1 or 2 examples that you could share as case studies?
Yeah, well, one that's I found quite distressing to listen to was an interview with the CEO of H&M. And the sort of distressing part, and it was very powerful stuff, his journey and, how well he'd done and all that kind of thing. And then one of the questions was around sustainability. And he said, well, our initiatives will be governed by legislation, which is a very standard sort of thing to say. But it basically says, I'm not going to do anything until I'm told I have to. And I found that really distressing because he was the CEO. And when they look into the meaning of what that means, the key word there is chief. You're the chief. You're the leader of a tribe of both employees, but you're the chief and leader of a tribe of people that buy your stuff and people that grow up. You have got powerful influence, powerful access. You've got powerful symbolic influence and material influence. And so for you to say, I'm going to wait and see what legislation comes out was really distressing because, and what I wanted to say to him is that's not how history works. If you look at the civil rights movement, the last people to get on the train were the politicians. It started with a small movement that was galvanized when Bob Dylan wrote Blowing in the Wind, and that pissed Sam Cooke off because it was a white guy singing about black rights. So he wrote A Change is Going to Come, and that helped evangelize and helped catalyze a movement that created activism. And the activists And the culturalists created the space, the idealists and the optimists created the space for the pragmatists and the realists to follow. So Lyndon Baines Johnson would not have got to civil rights policy or the Voting Acts without the civil rights movement being galvanized by culture to move into a space that the politicians followed. And so the frustrating thing when I heard the dude from H&M was he's waiting for the politicians. That's not how it works. We all each have to take our responsibility. And when I look at the world today and I see, what I can do, what can I do? And I think, what the things that have really damaged the lifestyle of the people I love are COVID, climate change, and conflict. And when I look into the world and say, who do I vote for to manage COVID globally, to manage conflict globally, and to manage climate globally, there is no one I can vote for globally. There are 195 countries with 195 leaders and their cabinets all trying to manage these things that ignore national borders from within their own 195 national borders. And you end up with a disintegrated system. You wouldn't design a solution for that problem in that way. And so when I look at myself as a citizen of the world and say, who can I vote for? The answer is no one. You have to rely on these institutions that were designed in 1948, like the UN and the WTO and all those that were designed at a time that we don't recognize now. And so what it comes down to is actually the only democratic power I have as one of the 8 billion citizens of Earth is how I spend my money. How I spend my money is my democratic expression. If I buy my products and I buy the brands that represent the future I want to live in, the future I want to see, then it brings into focus the power we have as individuals. It brings into focus the importance of brands in helping shape the space for the pragmatists and the realists to move into. And it brings into focus our own personal responsibilities, which is the reason why you're talking to me right now is not because of what I have, and it's not because of what I own. You're talking to me right now because of my knowledge and what I do. And that's what we all need to get our heads around, is it's all incumbent on our own internal meaning systems, that if we can start to be more shaped by our knowledge and our experiences and what we do, and less interested in the things we own and the things we have, then we can shape the future to be the future we want to see. And we can help brands move in that direction. We can help culture move into that direction. And ultimately, we can get policy to move there. But it's incumbent on us all as individuals. It's going to be 8 billion acts of consumption that will change the way the profit motive works.
My goodness, you're blowing my mind. Those are powerful concepts that you're peppering our conversation with. I recently read, Bob, that the world has all the technical competence and skills we need to create a more sustainable future. What we really need to work on is the spiritual, mental, emotional, ethical healing so that individuals make those choices. And you're saying what sounds to me is the same thing. Is the power of one. One need not feel they are a powerless cog. Perhaps concepts like United Nations are no longer relevant in this context, but instead, every individual votes with their wallet, and we can be conscious consumers and recognize the power in ourselves around the value system that guides us, the work we do, the experiences we are gathering, and in being more mindful individuals who make decisions with our buying, purchasing behavior, we can shape the world we live in. That's such a positive and empowering mindset to have. You talked about how Gen Z as well is going to be the defining generation in this shift. What's your prognosis? When you meet young people, are you seeing them recognize this power you're identifying within themselves?
Honestly, I think it's too much responsibility to say it's all on Gen Z. They want to have lived the generous lives that their parents have lived. They want the things their parents have had. They recognize that there is a responsibility in their generation to clean up the mess that our generation and previous generation has left behind, but they also want to enjoy life. So I think we have to all work together in a multi-generational solution. They're first in line to protest at Stop Oil, but they're also first in line for the new iPhone. So it's kind of, we've got to recognize that there's an inherent tension and work with it and work with them to do it. My belief is that the solution to sustainable life on Earth, there's 8 billion of us now, and we haven't figured it out. By the end of the century, there'll be 12 billion of us if we educate the daughters of the most impoverished countries on Earth, because educated daughters find another way other than having 6 kids. So there's a silver bullet there. If we can invest in that, we will stabilize population growth at around about 12 billion by the end of the century. It blows my mind when I look back to our country, like the UK. We run at 1% of population, always have done. So that means there'll be 120 million people on our small island. So when they make decisions to stop HS2, I'm like, we're going to need the infrastructure that Japan has right now on our island, right now, to future-proof ourselves for the end of the century. We should be talking about whether it's HS8 or 9, not cancelling HS2. So the short-termism of politics drives me absolutely crazy. So I think we have got to look into the long term. And the long-term truth is that we've got to make as good a decisions as we can make today as brand leaders, as business leaders, as individual consumers, because our job is to create a window. And it's to create a window so that someone who's not born today, who will live tomorrow, them and their cohort will design the solution using AI, using the technologies of the future that will figure out the solution. Our job isn't to figure out the solution because we've demonstrably proved we can't do it right now. Our job is to encourage everybody to make the right decisions so it gives them the time to create the solution. So we slow down degeneration, we slow down decay, we slow down climate change, so we expand the window for someone who's not born yet to help create the solution.
When you work with organizations and leaders today, what is one tip? The audience is listening to you around the world and clients that work with you. What's the one tip you'd give them to create these environments for this type of decision making? I'm hearing from you future focused, resilient, shareholder value focused. And also, you mentioned multiple stakeholders, so stakeholder centricity. How do we create environments within organizations where they are aligned with their ethics and integrity, are future focused, and are able to make decisions that are relevant for the future? Do you have a tip?
Yeah, it's kind of never trust a number. Numbers are very, very abstract, and you can only trust a number. You can never trust a number when it's on its own. You can only trust a number when it's got another number before it or another number after it, and then you understand the relationship of the numbers. And so numbers are very abstract. So I've sat in so many meetings where a board of meetings said, right, we're going to go from 100 million to 1 billion, and we're going to do it in 5 years. Like, okay, that's just like, it's nonsense. It's abstracted nonsense. The thing that shapes human behavior is not numbers. The thing that shapes human behavior is beliefs. If you can start to articulate beliefs and put beliefs at the heart of corporate strategy and see where that takes you, as opposed to set some artificial destination based on numbers. So I was very fortunate enough at the start of his journey to be involved with Simon Mottram, who was the founder of the cycling brand Rafa. And his strategy was based on a belief that he could make cycling the most loved sport in Britain. I'm like, you're joking. This is 25 years ago. Like football, rugby, cricket, swimming. It's not going to be cycling. You're absolutely mad. And he said, no, that's my belief. Now, I'll build a company to help me get there. Now, he did build a company and he sold that company for 220 million on a multiple of times 22 based on his storytelling around making cycling the most loved sport on earth in Britain. And in 2012, he achieved it. In 2012, Sports Personality of the Year, it was Mark Cavendish. We won the Tour de France. We won all the golds, something like 20 golds in cycling in the Olympics. And cycling, for a moment, became the most loved sport in Britain. And so he had a belief that shaped a strategy that then shaped an outcome. He didn't start with 220 million. And it's the same as, it's Kennedy. Let's put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And you'll organize lots of different people around a belief that something can be done if you've got a very simple objective. And that's what I would say. Let's start there. Let's start by redesigning corporate strategy so that it's based on a foundation of beliefs first, and let the numbers be the byproduct of the beliefs and the behavior and the culture, and go there. And do it from the bottom up. Don't do it from the top down. Include everybody in the creation of that belief system. And then you'll have an amazing culture that will drive the behavior, that will drive the results, and the numbers will take care of themselves.
That's fantastic. That's a great story as well. Do you feel this is still possible today with multinational corporations with offices scattered all over, multiculturalism, multi-generation workplaces? Is it still possible to build meaning from bottom up and allowing organizations and brands be guided by the people?
Yeah, I think not necessarily guided by the people, but you include the people so they can see themselves in the story of that company. So ask them. They don't necessarily have to be part of the creation of the solution, but at least if you ask them, they can start to see their own place in the story of that company. And it comes down to the power of storytelling in organizations. If I'm going to build a challenger company and I want that company to take on the world. So when Apple first came out, it was a challenger brand. It challenged the orthodox approach to computing. It then challenged the orthodoxy in music. It then challenged the orthodoxy in phones and then watches and so on. So you got a company that was very much about challenging the status quo and turning over the orthodoxy. It was a challenger brand. Now, that resonates with everybody that works for Apple globally, because there's a universally understood story there. In Anglo-Saxon tradition, that's Robin Hood. In Greek mythology, that's Prometheus. In Finnish folklore, that's Lemminkainen. It's a Ronin samurai in Japan. It's Geronimo in America. We all understand the story. It's a universally understood story that crosses national traditions, national boundaries, religions, civilizations, what have you. It's a universally understood story. And so that's how I do it. It starts with storytelling. It starts with building a story that people can contribute to and see themselves in, and making sure it's got a universal meaning.
Yeah, and capturing the imagination as a result of both within and outside. That's powerful. Is there a quote, book, or advice that has had a profound impact on your way of being? And would you like to share that with us?
Yeah, there's something my dad said to me, which is, if you do nothing, nothing happens. If you do something, something happens. So do something. Very simple, but very, very powerful. And just been reading a book, you said The Power of One. I've just been reading The Power of Now. And interesting in that, he said, history is simply a succession of now moments, and the future is just a succession of future now moments. What's really important is what you do right now. So when we talk about the big issues of the world, many people think they're too big for them to cope with. It's too big a problem. Who's going to solve climate change? Well, it's not me, and it'll be happening in the future. Well, actually, it is you, and it's not in the future. It's right now. It's what you do right now as the power of one in the power of now that can, if that's multiplied by everybody, that can change everything. We've got what's called a white rhino coming at us. COVID was a black swan, unpredictable, but it changed everything. Climate change isn't a black swan, it's a white rhino. It's big, it's massive, it's coming at us. We just can't get out of the way. So you've got a choice to make. Either you put your head in the sand and hope it doesn't run over you, or you do something about it. And my sort of plea to the world's CEOs, my plea to the world's brand creative directors, to our political leaders, and to us all as consumers is that we all behave together to not get out of the way, but to do something about it. Because it's coming and it's not going away.
That's a powerful metaphor. I have to ask, Bob, the panel behind you says votes for women, and it's been snagging my eye all through. Tell me a little bit about why you have that as your backdrop.
It's an original suffragette poster. So I live in a flat populated by daughters. So it's a kind of interesting thing I have on the wall. I've got another one there, which is an original letter from William Wilberforce. So a kind of anti-slavery letter. So they kind of comment on the fact there's actually quite a lot of slavery that goes on in the household chores here, and it's not always me that helps out. So there's a little bit of that hypocrisy that I talked about earlier, having the integrity to recognize there's sometimes a difference between our moral compass and our actual behavior. But yeah, so it's just a nice thing to have. I learned the other day, actually, from an Indian stunt woman who is called Aisha Hussain, and she was in Deadpool and Gladiator 2, and she's creating a space for people that look like her, but isn't an orthodox space. So she's a martial arts expert, and she was telling me that jiu-jitsu, which is one of the things she's an expert at, the suffragettes were experts at, because they had to work out how to wrestle the policemen when they were on the floor and protect themselves. And so it's very interesting to know that they were martially trained.
That's fascinating, both mentally and physically, looks like, because it was fighting against the tide. An Asian origin stunt woman expert on jiu-jitsu is also bucking the trend in that manner, isn't she? Because that is not how traditional Asian femininity is. That's not the picture one imagines. Pretty powerful.
Not conventional, but it could be the future.
Yes, absolutely. It's the leaders who follow their curiosity and take chances and believe in the power of now, as we learned today. That's what creates amazing stories and transformation. Bob, thank you so much for our conversation today. It's been so meaningful. I know I'm going to go back to this conversation again and again, because there's so many frameworks that you've shared, blueprints for the future, frameworks for leaders, managers, product managers, designers to think about. And you also have a vision that is very inclusive and empowering, because you're saying it does not need tremendous wealth or power. It's one person making a decision now, one step after the other, that can change the course of time and history. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Really appreciate you having me on board. It's a great platform. And like Ashish said, you ask amazing questions.
Our audience members want to know more about your work, about anything upcoming. How can they engage with you? Where can people find you? Where do you hang out?
I'm on Instagram, and then the book, which captures everything, the brand new future, how brands can save the world. That's available at Amazon, Waterstones, and WH Smith.
I will share the link for the book, certainly. And your Instagram account that people can follow you on is?
Bob Sheard. I think it's Bob Sheard, and there's another one called Sheardy Loves. And so if you want to look at my cooking and my art, Sheardy Loves. If you want to look at my work, it's Bob Sheard.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
As we wrap up today's discussion on the human conversation on leadership and ethics, it's clear that integrity and ethics are the cornerstone of leadership. Host Kaumadi Gowda thanks you for joining us in this vital dialogue. Before you go, hit that subscribe button and become a part of the community dedicated to ethical leadership. Share your thoughts and continue the conversation with #TheHumanConversationPodcast.